Good evening, everybody.
Kodesh Tov.
Kodesh Tov, thank you. Okay, so we're starting with Gimel today. It says in the Bet Yosef like this. Katva Got Maimon. It says over there in this book, Beshem Samag, the name of the Samag, not the book. שמותר ללוש ביין, אף על פי שאי אפשר ליין בלא טיפת מים. So it says you're allowed to knead the matzah with wine, even though it's not possible that there should be no water in there. In other words, there must be some water in there, in the wine. Why is that? Because it falls from the rain, at the time of the harvesting. So he says, because of that, there's always some water in there, a couple of drops here or there. Nevertheless, right, even though we said last week, we mentioned the issue that, when you have fruit juice and together with water, this leavens much faster or whatever. But nevertheless, here he says, right, it's okay. That's the chidush. That's the new idea here. Okay, so besides that, he goes on. So he says, then why aren't we concerned, right? That's the question. That, this is going to cause it to leaven faster because it's a mixture of fruit juice and the wine. I'm sorry, the fruit juice and water. So the answer is, he says that because, it already got nullified. In other words, those few drops that fell in, during the harvest were nullified already in the wine. So therefore, it's not really significant anymore. That's the whole thing, right? So therefore, right, we say that there's no problem. Interesting. Okay. So then he goes on, right? That's what it says in the Samag. He says, again, right? Same thing he says, that even though it's not possible that you have wine without, a drop of water, there must be something in there. So he says, not only that, but the truth is that, they're accustomed to do that, to add water at the time of the harvest. Okay, interesting. So nevertheless, he says, so he says, we're not concerned about that. Right, again, same thing, right? Again, it says the same thing, right? Since it got nullified. Before they kneaded the dough, it's already nullified in the wine. So, I'm not really sure if you know about this, but, in kashrut, right, in the word, in halacha, there's a concept of nullification. So what does that mean? That the minority ingredient gets nullified in the majority ingredient, Sometimes it gets nullified in a majority. Sometimes you need a 60th, to get nullified, whatever. But here we're not talking about really kashrut. We're talking about the issue of the property is nullified. The property of the water is nullified in the wine. So it's like the property is not there. We're not, because it has nothing to do with kashrut really. It has to do with the issue of leavening. So anyway, right, that's what he says. Interesting. Then he goes on, Belik Abayit, right? Belik Abayit. Katav Arash ben Arash Betz, right? It says this rabbi. Yain simukim hu kiyain anavim. So it says, what about wine which is made out of raisins, right? Uh, so he says it's the same as grape wine, right? So he says also wine which is made out of raisins does not leaven. Interesting, right? כי המים ששרו בהם צימוקים נשתנו מבריאתם אחר שנשרו בהם הצימוקים. So interesting, right? He says that, if you know a little bit about how this is done, when you make wine out of raisins, right, it's not the same thing as making it out of grapes. What's the difference? Even though raisins are basically dried grapes, right? That's what they are. But nevertheless, right? Since they're dried, so we have to add water to it. That's the thing. So he says, right, that even though we add water in order to make wine out of raisins, nevertheless, he says, right, once it gets mixed in with the raisins, right, the water, and it makes like a wine, whatever. So he says that at that point, the property of the water has changed already. It's become something else. Interesting. כמים של גשמים שנשתנו בתוך הענבים עד כאן ישנו. So he says, right, that this is the way it is. This is the property. So what does that mean? After you soak, right, the raisins in the water, it changes the property of the water. Interesting. Wow. But, the question is, okay, well, it sounds very interesting what he's saying, right? But how does he know that? Interesting, right? Where does he get this from? But anyway, he's a big rabbi, so we'll see, right? What the Shulchan Aruch does with this. Maybe that he's gonna paskin like him, even though we really don't know where he gets this from. This information. He's reliable, He's a big rabbi.
What's the name of the rabbi? You said from Bedek Habayit, no?
Right. So, So the Bedek Habayit is like it's a later work that was written by Maran Bet Yosef, to augment the Bet Yosef. In other words, it's like the final word, the final rendition. That's Bedek Habayit, right? So Bedek Habayit brings you like some more information, which was not in the Bet Yosef, which he gathered later on at some time. So, but that's not the source for this, right? The source for this is the Rashbetz, right? He had a son, and his name was the Rashbesh. Right? These are like all abbreviations, right? As we said, right? These rabbis. So the Rashbesh is the son of the Rashbetz, and he's the one who has this teaching. It's in his name.
Thank you very much.
So these are two big chachamim, from Spain. Like not too far before Bet Yosef. They're like maybe maximum 100 years before, maybe even less. So, but they're considered to be earlier authorities, Rishonim, right? The Rashbetz and the Rashbesh. Okay, so anyway, right, that's the story there. Let's see in the Shulchan Aruch if he paskins like that, right? That's the question. Let's see how that works. Okay. So say Shulchan Aruch like this. מותר ללוש ביין אף על פי שאי אפשר לו בלא טיפת מים. So he says, right, you're allowed to knead the dough with wine, even though, as we said, right, it's not possible that there should be no water in there. There is some water in there, a couple of drops here and there. Where does that water come from? It falls right as rain on when they harvest it. So it's like a residue that stays over, the rain from the rain. So he says not only that, but the truth is, they actually on purpose, they add water at the time of the harvest, to the grapes. So it's definitely there, but nevertheless, it's okay. כדי להתיר ניצוק ואף על פי אין לחוש להם. להתיר ניצוק, yeah. So it says, בשעת הבציר, כדי להתיר ניצוק ואף על פי כן אין לחוש להם, הואילו כבר נתבטלו המים. So it says, we're not concerned about that water. Why is that? Because as we said, right, it gets nullified in the wine. It's relatively small amount. Right, קודם שלשו העיסה. So he says, right, before they did the kneading, it's already nullified. Okay, interesting. So he doesn't bring, right, this last teaching that we taught here in the Shulchan Aruch, doesn't bring that. So I guess you could say, right, that he's not so sure, just like I wasn't so sure. In other words, how this rabbi knows, right, this information that when it comes to the raisins, right, the raisin wine. How does he know, right? That even though we add, because when it comes to raisin wine, we add like a lot of water to that, So, nevertheless, right? The Rashbesh was very confident about that, but Maran doesn't bring him here in the Shulchan Aruch. Interesting. So right? You take it as it is. So meaning what? That he doesn't seem to be 100% sure that he's right about that. I also wasn't 100% sure myself. Okay, interesting. So that's the story there. But there's room to be lenient though, in certain cases, to rely on this opinion in certain cases. Because the truth is, that we already said that there's also another opinion that allows to mix fruit juice with water and to make matzah like that. Who was that? We did that last week, right? It was the Rif and the Rambam. They do allow that. But we said, right, that the custom by us is not like that. But nevertheless, right here, maybe it's possible to say we should allow it because we also have this opinion here, who says that gets kind of like that the nature of the water, the property of the water changes. I don't know. It's kind of like a stretch, but whatever, right?
Kavod Harav, this is where we have to bake the matzah right away, no? When we mix it with wine. That's the only exception.
Oh, right. Yes, that's the diavad. Yeah. In other words, if you did it, so then bake it right away. Yes, that's the solution.
Okay.
Right. But here we're talking about lechatchila. In other words, lechatchila, should you do that? That's the question. So apparently the answer is not really. Not such a great idea. Lechatchila to do this. If you did it, okay, so bake it right away. No problem. Right. That's the idea. Okay. So good. I hope you understand what I'm saying. Let's go on to the next one, which is Dalid. Okay, we gotta find this one. Here it is. Okay, so it says in the Beit Yosef, Katav Rashba, says the Rashba, She'ela ma'u latuach bebetzah et ha'isa bepesach. So now the question is like this, right? What about, are you allowed to baste, right, the matzah with eggs before you bake it? Okay. By the way, we already talked about basting, if you remember, right? If you recall, we said that you're allowed to baste with water. There was opinions like that, whatever. So that we said is okay. As far as I remember, that was okay. But, actually the customers like to baste, with the water. It's like part of the process. But here it's talking about basting it with the eggs. It's like that's what that's some people do that with challah, right? When they make challah for Shabbat, they baste it with eggs, so it gets that color, that right brown color to it. So, that's the whole thing, right? So the question is, can you do that also with matzah? To baste it with eggs, right? So regarding that, says the Rashba, right? So it says, Harif mina matirim. So he says the Rif allows that, right? As we already said, right? The Rif allows mixing water with fruit juice. So this is the same thing, right? So it's no surprise. Ben lekatef ben alush. So as we said, right, he allows whether to baste it or to knead like that. He also allows that as well. Mina geonim asru. But he says, a lot of the geonim were stringent about this, not like the Rif. Forbade to do so. Ben lekatef ben alush, whether it's basting or whether it's kneading. So it says also, right, a lot of the big rabbis, he says, right, also forbade that. Achronim, he says later authorities. So he says that's also our custom, right? The custom by us is to forbid this. Who's saying this? The Rashba, right? So he's saying, right, that the custom by them was to forbid. So the truth is, you don't see anybody doing this today, right? To baste the matzah with eggs. No such a thing like this today. But what we do have is egg matzah, right? That's something else. What's the difference between egg matzah and this? Why is this not allowed and egg matzah is allowed? So the answer is that with egg matzah, you're not using any water, right? It's just eggs, for everything. But here, right, you're using water to knead the dough, and then you're using eggs to baste it, right? And that says the Rashba is not allowed, right? That's more severe. It's more stringent, that case. That's why the Rashba says it's not allowed. Okay, so we have more Bet Yosef to do here. There's more pieces here. This one. Dalet Bet. So it says, right, Umash katav ume betzim haya mistapek Rashi im machmitzin b'rabel. So here he talks about, again, right, using, to make egg matzah, right? In other words, to knead it with the dough with eggs, raw eggs, right? Im machmitzin b'rabel tam haya matir. So, right, the Tur brought a machloket about that, right? According to Rashi, he has a doubt whether that causes, leavening or not. And Rabbi Tam says does not leaven, right? So two different opinions, right? Rabbi Tam was the grandson of Rashi, right? The same family. Okay, one family, but two different opinions, right? Okay. So it says, right, Ken Katva Rosh. So it says also the Rosh says this, right? The Ve'aran, also the Ran. V'chen pashat minhag le'atir. So he says, right, that says Bet Yosef, the custom is to be lenient, right, regarding this. And that's how we do today, right? That we do, as we said, right, we're lenient about making egg matzah. That's okay. As we said, right, the Ashkenazim will only use that for, like old people, sick people, things like this. But by us, by the Sfardim, it's allowed the Chatchila to have egg matzah, no problem. But as we said, right, to do the mitzvah with egg matzah, no way, right? There's no such a thing like that. The mitzvah has to be done only with the right matzah made with water, nothing else. Right? Okay, that's the story. So that's another Bet Yosef. I think there's even more. More Bet Yosef. This one. So it says right here, he brings the Rambam. The Rambam katab perkei mutar lalush ha'isa b'shemen. So, right, says the Rambam, you're allowed to knead the dough with oil, right, or devash, or with the, right, as we said, with honey, the chalab, and also he says milk as well. Or lekatef behem. Also, you can use them for basting, he says. So, what do we see from there? That he's like the Rif, right? Just like the Rif allows to baste with this stuff, so does the Rambam. But he says the first day, right, when you're doing the mitzvah, that's a different story, right? There we don't do that. So what do? He says you knead it with water and you baste it with water, right? That's it. That's all you got. Okay, good. לא משום חמץ, לא משום חמץ, אלא כדי שיהיה לכם עוני. So it says, it's not because of leavening this issue, right? It's just that we require a poor man's bread, right? That's what we need for the mitzvah. וביום הראשון בלבד הוא שצריך להיות זיכרון ללחם. Right? It says that's only the first day, right? For the mitzvah. All right, lechem oni, tevarav kidivre arif. So he says again, right, as we said, he holds like the Rif. Shepiresh the braita mayre alidem main. So because he holds the Rif, right, that braita that we learned last week, that allows you to use fruit juice and all that kind of stuff, right? It's talking about when there's a mixture also with water as well. He allows that too. Upasak kerabi Rabbi Akiva. He passes like Rabbi Akiva, the share that allows that. Miyom Sheni, from the second day and onward. And it says in the 6th chapter, the Rambam, he writes, Matza shelasha b'meperot, yotze ba yedeh v'chovato b'pesach, aval en lashin b'yain. Oh, so Rambam says a little bit different, right? He says that if you needed the dough with fruit juice, you can even do the mitzvah with that. That's very interesting. But he says not with wine, right? You can do fruit juice, but not wine. Or b'shemen, no oil, right? The chalav, or no milk. Mishum lechem oni, right? So in other words, he says fruit juice is okay. But the other 3 liquids that we mentioned, right, are not okay. Right? For the mitzvah we're talking about, right? According to Rambam. Kimo shebianu. Ve'im lash ve'achal lo yatzai dechovato. So he says, even if he needed it with these 3 substances that we just mentioned, and he ate that, he didn't fulfill his obligation, right, for the mitzvah. He did not. That's not the way to do it. Katav Rav Magid shetamo midetanya. So says Rav Magid, right? What's the reason of the Rambam? What's why he differentiates between this and that? Right? He has a unique approach to this, right? Whole issue. Why is that? Shetamo midetanya prat leisa shenilosha beyain b'shemen v'dvash. Because it says in the Talmud that you're not allowed to use, right, for the mitzvah, wine and oil and honey. So he says they only excluded those 3. So what does that mean? They did not exclude fruit juice, right, in the Talmud. וכן הנילוש בחלב שנזכר בעובדא דרבי יהושע בן לוי, לפי שהפת הנילוש בהם אינו לחם עוני. This is also if you use milk, right? No good. It's not a poor man's bread. About pat שנילוש בשאר משכין, but it says if you're using other types of liquids, as we said, like fruit juice and so on, יוצא, right? He does fulfill the obligation. וזהו שלא אמרו פרת לעיסה שנילושה במשכין. That's why the Talmud didn't say, right? Didn't exclude the other types of liquids, right? So there you go, right? So it seems like the Talmud supports the Rambam regarding this issue. But as we said, right, the custom by us is not like that. But that's what the Rambam holds. Okay, interesting. So it goes on. ועדיין נשאר לדקדק בדברי הרמב"ם בפרק ה' כתב ביום ראשון אסור ללוש ולקטף אלא במים בלבד. So right, this is also, we have to ask another question, which is, right, on the Rambam, that he said that on the first day, right, when we're doing the mitzvah, he says only use water, right? But then we just say, wait a second, you're allowed to use fruit juice? But here he says, like, he seems to contradict and says you can only use water. כדי שיהיה לחם עוני, that should be poor man's bread. ואיך מכשיר בפרק ו' מצה שלושה בימי פירות. So then how does he allow, right, in the other perek, in the other chapter, to use fruit juice, right? It seems to contradict himself. There seems to be a discrepancy here, or something like that. So he says, חוץ מיין ושמן הדבש, בחלב ואפשר, דין החינמי דאסור ללוש להתכתב אלא במים בלבד, מיהו אם עבר בלש בשאר משכין, חוץ מיין ושמן דבש, חלב יוצא בה. So it says, right, he tries to answer like this, the Bet Yosef. He says that it could be that the Rambam holds, the lechatchila, you shouldn't use that stuff, right? For the mitzvah. What does that mean? For the mitzvah, lechatchila, you shouldn't use fruit juice. But if you did, right, you can fulfill your obligation with that. Could be that's the way to reconcile the discrepancy. The yesh tomar the perek the lo hava mayre ela beyain v'shem dvash. So also he says, right, when it comes to the fifth chapter, he's only talking about those 3 liquids, right? Wine and oil and honey, the chalav, and also the number 4, right, which is the milk. Shena matzah kshira bahen klal. So he says the matzah is not really kosher like that. Meaning what? For the mitzvah, right? Shayach Shapir lememar asul alush l'katef. And then it's right. It's relevant to say that you're not allowed to use that stuff for for making the mitzvah. Ela b'mayim bilbad, only with water. Shelo ba lema'et ela elu arba mashkin. He's only coming to exclude these 4 liquids. לבד. וכיוון דבשום אחד מאלו משכין אין המצה כשרה, so he says since, right, that with those 4 liquids, right, there's no scenario where the matzah is kosher for the mitzvah. כי כאמר אסור ללוש וכתף, when he said, right, that you're not allowed to knead and to baste, אלא במים בלבד, only with water, אינו במשמע שממעט אלא אלו משכין. He's only coming to exclude these things, right, these liquids. In other words, he's not coming to exclude fruit juice. לבד. וזהו דת הרמב"ם להכשיר מצה שנגלושה. So it says that's the opinion of the Rambam that allows, right, to use matzah which was needed with the fruit juice for the mitzvah. בשאר מפירות חוץ, except מארבע משכין אלו, except these 4 we mentioned. אבל לא ראיתי לשום אחד מהפוסקים שחילק בין יין ושמן ודבש וחלב לשאר ממשכין. So he says, but you know what? Says Bet Yosef something interesting, right? I didn't see any other posek who differentiates between those 4, right, liquids and fruit juice, because by the other poskim, these things are all the same. So then, where does the Rambam, right? Why is that, right? What's the reason why the other poskim have never said this except the Rambam? Says that's also the Tur, right? The Tur also says that you can only use water. Because all these liquids are called, right, fruit juice, basically, right? They're all like fruits, product of a fruit, something of something. So he says that, says Rav Magid, ראיתי מי שכתב שאינו יוצא במצה הנילושה בשמן ויין ודבש בלבד, אלא אם תערובת המים לפי שאנו צריכים שימור מחמץ, כל שאינו מחמיץ אין יוצאים בו ידי מצה, וכבר נתבאר שמי פירות לבד אין מחמיצין, הדבר נכון הוא עד כנשונו. So he tries to give an answer here for this question, for this dilemma, whatever. So again, right, let's try to understand what he's trying to say. So he brings up Rav Magid, right? And the Rav Magid says like this. He says, I saw somebody, right? Misha Katab, so he says, when it comes to not fulfilling the obligation of the mitzvah, you can't use, as we said, right, oil and wine and honey. Only those. All right, unless you mix in water with it. Because we need that it should be guarded from chametz. So it's interesting. He says something interesting, right? That it has to be that there's water in there, right? Why is that? Because otherwise, there's a concept of guarding the matzah, and so if there's no water, there's no concept of guarding, because it'll never leaven like that. Okay. So he says it's correct. This answer, he says, according to Rabbi Magid, Matzati. So it says Bet Yosef, I found katuv bekolbo. It says in the kolbo, the chalav lo chashiv me perot. That milk is not called, right, fruit juice, umachamitz, and it does leaven. Utamani deha minan. It says, but as I'm wondering, because we said in Psachim lamed vav b'mud aleph, the Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi amar לבנה מיומר כמה ואילך לא לי בחלבה. So he told his daughter, right, that you can use, right, told his son he can use milk, for the other days, right, besides the first day. ואף אגב דאותיבנה עלהו לישנה מדתניא אין להשין את הפת בחלב מפני הרגל הרגל העבירה ושנינן. So even though we objected, right, and said that there's another source which says that you shouldn't use milk because it could bring you to sin, right? What does that mean, bring you to sin? Because if your matzah is dairy, right, you could come to eat that with meat, so we don't want that. So he says, so the truth is, he says, right, he didn't say to use honey, he said to use I'm sorry. He didn't say to use milk. He said to use honey. מכל מקום, לא, but he says, nevertheless, לא ידחה ההוא לישנא משום דחלב מחמיץ. But he says, nevertheless, right, that we still are holding by this concept that milk does leaven, cause leavening. אלא משום דהרגיל עבירה דבשר בחלב. But he says also there's an issue of right meat and milk. We don't want that. The matzah should be dairy. And it says also afterwards we said, says, I can also tell you right that we're talking about milk, not about honey. Right, so he says, right, different answer also, how to answer this question. There could be that's talking about milk. But he says, you know what, that milk doesn't really cause like a full type of leavening, like it doesn't really do the job of leavening fully, so therefore that's why we're not really stringent about it. So according to this answer, right, using milk is okay. What does that mean? Not for the mitzvah, but to knead right matzah with milk. If you want to have your dairy matzah, that you could do that. Okay, interesting, right? By the way, there's a rule like this, in a different place in the Shulchan Aruch, right? That says that if you want to make, your bread, right, dairy, you want to put milk in your bread, to knead it with milk and whatever. So what you have to do is, right, make it into a different shape. And this way, right, people know that it's dairy, so they won't come to eat it with meat, So the truth is, right, this would also apply here. That if you want to make your own matzah, dairy, so then you would have to, right, make it a different shape. The custom, by the way, nowadays is that if you're making, dairy bread, which is dairy, or all kinds of borekas and stuff like this, we make it like a triangle shape. So this way, right, people know, oh yeah, that's the triangle, right? The triangle means it's dairy. That's what we do today, right? In Israel, that's what they do all the time. When they make something dairy, they make a triangle shape. So when you eat borekas, which are triangular, right, in Israel, that means it's dairy. Okay. So that's the story there, yeah. So there's another Bet Yosef here. I think this one we already did. Anyway, let's see the Shulchan Aruch. So it says Shulchan Aruch, מי ביצים ושאר משקים כולם אהבו בכלל מי פירות. So it says, right, that when it comes to, raw eggs, right, yolks, whatever, egg whites, whatever. And it says also other types of liquids, right, other types of, it says they're all considered to be like fruit juice. So what does that mean? They don't leaven. So all other liquids, right, the fruit juices and whatever they may be, right, the eggs, and we already said, right, the same also applies to honey and oil, right, and milk, right, all these things, they're all in the same category. And what else did we say? Wine also, right? Yeah, same thing. Right? So all these liquids, they're all the same. So what does that mean? Right, that they don't cause leavening, all these liquids. So as we said, right, if you don't mix it with water, these liquids will never cause the dough to leaven, even if you leave it all day. That's what we're saying, right? So therefore, as we said, right, when it comes to the mitzvah, you shouldn't use these liquids, for sure not, right? But when it comes to just eating, on Passover, so you can use it if you like, if you like this kind of stuff, you enjoy it, so do it. Why not? Whatever, right? So whatever makes you happy. So here the Ramah comes in, right, and brings the Ashkenazi custom, right, which we said, right, it's going to come in, it's going to kick in, right, sooner or later. Here it is, right, here we are. So it says the Ramah over here. It says, so it says in our countries, right? What does that mean? The Ashkenazi countries, right? They don't knead with fruit juice. Says also we don't baste it either, he says, right? only after the baking, right? This is that you can do. So after the baking, you can baste it, right, with this kind of stuff. But prior to the baking, says the Rama, you should not baste it with fruit juice or any other kinds of liquids like this, whatever it may be, right? Eggs, whatever it may be. So the custom by them is to avoid this altogether. Only after the baking they allow. Then לשנות אם לא בשעת הדחק לצורכי החולה או זקן צריך זה. So what does the Rama say, right? Exactly what we told you before, right? The only person that can be lenient regarding this is who, right? Somebody who's sick or old, right? Old timer, right? Those guys can be lenient because they have a hard time eating sometimes, right? Matza, which is made from water, because it's harder to digest it, right? So therefore, they make it with fruit juice and all these liquids and all these kinds of stuff. So, right, as we said, with eggs also, the egg matzah. So the Ashkenazim only allow this for sick and old, but we Sfaradim, right, we allow all these things with no problem, right? No issues, no concern. Okay, very good. I guess we'll stop there. Bezrat Hashem, thanks for coming. Be blessed with wealth and health and happiness. The Torah brings you all these good things, in life. When you learn Torah, Baruch Hashem. So, Bezrat Hashem, we'll see you tomorrow. Laila Tov, Chazak Baruch. All the best.
Thank you so much.
Bye. Chodesh Tov.